Now, without any further delay, let's begin today's event. Once again, leveraging CMMI 2.0 and DevOps to maximize Agile transformation. I would like to introduce our first presenter for today, and that is Anna Ballmert, Marketing Specialist for CMMI Institute. Anna, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Christina. Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As Christina said, I'm Anna Ballmert, Marketing Specialist at CMMI Institute, and I have the pleasure of introducing today's webinar, Leveraging CMMI version 2.0 and DevOps to Maximize Agile Transformation. Over the next 30 minutes, our panel of thought leaders will delve into the relationship between the DevOps toolchain, process integration, and CMMI version 2.0, and how these methodologies can be used in conjunction to maximize Agile intentions and drive greater transformative change. The final 10 minutes will be dedicated to answering attendee questions, as Christina said. Please note that you can submit a question at any time during the webinar via the chat box on your screen. Those not able to be addressed in the time allotted will be answered by follow-up email to all of our attendees. For today's webinar, we are thrilled to welcome guest speaker Bob Moore, who is President of Business Transformation Institute Incorporated and brings over 32 years of experience as a manager, systems engineer, process improvement implementer, and applied mathematician. Bob is a DevOps practitioner, certified CMMI High Maturity Lead Appraiser, certified Six Sigma Black Belt, and certified systems engineering professional. Bob will be joined by CMMI Institute's lead architect and director of IP development, Ron Lear. Ron has over 34 years of experience in continuous performance improvement, quality, and process management with expertise in CMMI high maturity, Agile, and DevOps concepts. He is a certified manager of quality and organizational excellence, as well as a certified high maturity lead appraiser and instructor, conducting over 300 appraisals across the globe for organizations in a wide variety of industries. And with that, I will turn it over to Ron to get us started on today's webinar.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you, Bob, for joining us today. I would like to just point out that I'm very thrilled to have Bob here with us today. Bob has been a key partner with the Institute for a long time, and I'm very, very happy that he's been able to take some time with us today and talk about some of his experience with both 2.0, DevOps, and Agile. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in. First, we're going to just kind of set the ground and set the foundation here and talk a little bit about the differences, an overview of DevOps, Agile, and CMMI, and then Bob's going to walk us through the three ways of DevOps and talk about how they work in complementary fashion with CMMI 2.0 practice areas and techniques, et cetera. Then we'll bring it back to a little bit about how DevOps and DevSEC Ops and CMMI 2.0 actually can work together, focusing on some similar things. We're going to base that off of a pretty interesting article that tried to put DevOps in plain language. That's going to be referenced for you on the slides. Before we get started, we will do a live poll. We've got one question for you kind of at the beginning and another question for you at the end, because part of the purpose of this webinar, besides providing insight and awareness into DevOps, DevSEC Ops, Agile, and CMMI version 2.0 is as architect and director of IP development, I'm interested in hearing feedback from you all in your questions and in these polling opportunities to really hear what you're looking for, what your customers are looking for when it comes to how CMMI and DevOps and Agile all work together. So that's what we'll end up doing for those two efforts, and we will be using that information to help direct and guide what we do in some of our upcoming content for 2.0. And then we will, as Anna said, we will go over and do some Q&A towards the end of the session after Bob and I do a little bit of, I'll say, bantering back and forth on Agile, DevOps, and CMMI. Christina, I'll turn it over to you for our first poll, please.
Great, thank you. So you should now be able to see the poll in the center of your screen. If not, just try refreshing your browser to reset your connection. So we're asking, on a scale of 1 to 5, assess your organization's readiness to transition to DevSEC Ops and CMMI. Is it 5, we have already adopted DevOps, DevSEC Ops, or CMMI? 4, a DevOps, DevSEC Ops, or CMMI implementation is currently underway. 3, some planning for DevOps, DevSEC Ops, or CMMI has been completed. 2, we have considered using DevOps, DevSEC Ops, or CMMI. Or 1, we have not heard of our plan to adopt DevOps, DevSEC Ops, or CMMI. And again, you should be able to see the poll in the center of your screen. If not, just try refreshing your browser. And you just need to select the radio button that best corresponds to your answer, and then click the Submit button that's located on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And we'll just give it a few more seconds to allow for everyone to vote. Again, you just need to select the radio button that best corresponds to your answer in that panel, and then click the Submit button. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, presenters, you should be able to see the results.
All right, so interesting. We've got about 34% of you. We had about looks like a 71% response rate, so thank you all for that. Looks like many of you have already started the adoption path for CMMI and DevOps. I'd be interested as we go through the questions is to talk about how, and this is a great question that's already come in from John. So John, you and I are thinking on the same language here. I think it would have been better for us to have separated that out between DevOps and CMMI. Let's call that anthropomorphism for CMMI from the chief architect. We'll try to fix that for the next time around. So I'd appreciate your questions to give us clarity around those two things as we go forward. So we'll try to couch what we're talking about to orient. It looks like the top 4 categories are really where most of you are doing a quick Pareto. That's where most of you are looking at as you're either underway or you're planning to move forward with DevOps. So this looks like it's a good, timely topic. Bob, over to you for an overview of DevOps.
Thank you, Ron. So good day, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about DevOps. If you've already implemented or adopting DevOps, you may find that this is relatively familiar territory, but let's make sure everyone's on the same place. DevOps is a cultural and professional movement that stresses communications, collaboration, and integration between software developers and IT operations professionals. That it focuses often, and this is the thing that DevOps is often known for, but it's not the only thing that we should know about DevOps, that focuses on automating the process of software delivery and infrastructure changes. The idea here is that we need to keep all pieces of our enterprise moving forward at the same rate. Many, many enterprises, I hesitate to say all, but a majority of enterprises now depend heavily on the services or products that they deliver through systems and software, and if how we develop software, how we deploy software, how we sustain software out in operations becomes disconnected from the way that the business is performing, or vice versa, then not good things will happen. So DevOps aims at establishing a culture and environment where building, testing, and releasing software can happen rapidly, frequently, and more reliably, all in service of the business or mission needs. And DevOps is not a separate team. It's not a culture alone. It's not automation alone. Often it's presented as such, but it's not. It's a combination of all of the above. And it's certainly not anarchy, nor does it, like CMMI, it doesn't one size fits all. It has to be adapted and tailored to the specific needs of the organization. So DevOps is about delivering the improvements in time to market, integration with the business, responsiveness, and code and development quality. And it builds in a culture that uses automation, lean, measurement, and sharing information to improve results. So if nothing else, then you should walk away with, is DevOps about automation? Yes, it is, but it's also about that cultural change, which may sound familiar to many of you as Ron takes us through Agile and then CMMI. Ron.
Thanks, Bob. So yeah, that's a perfect segue, because when you look at Agile and other methodologies, culture, Agile values, for those of you who were in the webinar with us last go around with Jeff Dalton, that's one of the big topics that we talked about. So for those of you who are familiar with the terms from the Agile Manifesto, the focus is around individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration, over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. What that doesn't mean is that kind of culture and that kind of thinking preclude the need to actually have some discipline around how systems and software engineering are being developed so that you actually know that you'll be able to deliver what you're supposed to be delivered at the end of the day. So that's kind of where 2.0 and Agile work extremely well together, because Agile provides an approach within the 2.0 framework for doing just that for those types of software, work products, and so forth, where it makes sense to do. But as it says here, it's not permission to wing it, and wishing and hoping is not a way to actually deliver software. So that's where the CMMI comes in. And one of the things that I think I've been through discussions with Bob and in the DevOps courses that I've been through, one of the things that I think we see very clearly, we'll talk about this in a little bit, DevOps and CMMI 2.0 focus on something very common, that is the end outcome and driving information like performance and measurement throughout the entire life cycle. Earlier is better. That's always a cost reduction activity. So we're going to talk about how CMMI, Agile, and DevOps all together, while they are in fact anchored in cultural ideas, values, and so forth, there's some practicalities in play as well. So we'll go back and let Bob start walking us through the 3 ways. Bob, back over to you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the 3 ways are some of the key ideas in implementing DevOps. And although the 3 ways are not the sum totality of what DevOps are, they do provide important insight into the DevOps culture and how an organization's culture might evolve to work jointly with value-oriented systems and software development, delivery, and sustainment. So first we'll talk about the DevOps First Way. Let me give you a little quick synopsis before we delve into that. So the 3 ways, the first way is about flow, it's about moving value from left to right. The second way is about the feedback loop that enables continuous improvement. And then the third way is about the continuous experimentation and learning that build an organization that's prepared to face whatever the world might throw at it. So the first way is about understanding and increasing the flow of work, the value essentially from left to right as we move across the page from doing the development into the actual operations. And that involves understanding how the work is performed to increase value to the customer, and how do we remove the constraints or the impediments or the bottlenecks that prevent work and ultimately value that's being created by the work from flowing smoothly to the stakeholders and to the customers, and how do we improve that entire system. So it's about that value flow from left to right. And as we talk about the implications of the first way, we have to recognize that multiple CMMI 2.0 practice areas, and note the transition of the language for those of you who haven't thought about the transition from CMMI 1.3 to CMMI 2.0. If you were familiar in 1.3 with process areas, now we're talking about practice areas. So we can talk about that giving us the tools to make DevOps First Way part of our culture. So although there are many CMMI practice areas that might be of interest, and really too many to discuss in the context of the DevOps First Way in the short time that we have available today, I'd like to focus on the relationship between one practice area, which is process management, and the DevOps toolchain. So toolchains, the automation that we put together to link from development of user stories, development of requirements, out through development planning, development management, doing the actual development, doing the testing, doing the integration, doing the support, ultimately doing the delivery and the sustainment. The DevOps toolchain is one area that is very famous and what people often talk about when they talk about DevOps. So toolchains aren't the entirety of DevOps, but they are, of course, an important part. So there may be obvious process areas to discuss with respect to the toolchain, like implementation infrastructure, but you can read about that for yourselves and understand those obvious aspects. So let's talk about something that's a little bit more obscure. So PCM, process management, and let's talk specifically about Practice 1.1 as an illustrative example. So that practice calls for us to develop a support structure to provide process guidance, identify and fix process problems, and continuously improve processes. And the value proposition, that's one of the great things about CMMI 2.0, is it's telling us, why do you care? So the value proposition here is that a process improvement support structure allows us to reduce effort, cycle time, cost, defects, and waste, and increase performance. This is exactly the DevOps First Way. How do we move value, work and value, more quickly from left to right? How do we optimize that entire system? So in the context of the DevOps toolchain, how does the toolchain become an instrument for delivering that value proposition? How does the value chain integrate operationally to make sure that defects don't pass forward, that we identify those defects as early as possible in the development, integration, and delivery chain, and ask, how is this escaping forward, and how do we push this backwards? How do we understand that entire value delivery system? And think about this in the context of PCM. So we're not just talking about the individual pieces of the process. It does us no good whatsoever, it does us some good maybe, to optimize how we're doing development if the work that's being done in development cannot flow smoothly and quickly into a customer's hands. And so we have to look at that entire process holistically as opposed to looking at individual pieces. And the DevOps toolchain, as one of many pieces, helps us to implement that first way and helps us move forward with both DevOps and CMMI to achieve what we really want. And what we really want is the ability to respond to customers, deliver value, and have everyone at the end of the day satisfied with what they're getting. So the DevOps Second Way is about feedback. It's principally about creating shorter feedback loops to enable a better understanding and better responsiveness to ultimately enable continuous improvement. So again, there are obvious CMMI practice areas that we might discuss in the context of the second way, like causal analysis and resolution. But again, let's look more holistically. So if for those of you who recall the CMMI 1.3, there was a process area named requirements management, which at long last has been united with its best friend, requirements development, to create the CMMI 2.0 practice area of requirements development and management. So yay us that came together. And that leads us to ask, what does the stakeholder want? What does the customer want? And how do we stay synchronized with the customer's needs or wants? And so you can think about that in terms of CMMI language as traceability. We can think about that in terms of DevOps language as how do we create that feedback loop so that we understand as the customer's needs and desires and the customer's issues that they encounter in the field feedback into why are we doing this, what does this tell us that we're supposed to be doing, and how do we go about doing development. Equally, the CMMI practice area of process quality assurance, practice 2.3, says communicate quality and noncompliance issues and ensure the resolution, and 3.1 practice says identify and record opportunities for improvement during quality assurance activities. And DevOps tells us that a traditional viewpoint of process quality assurance might be that I'm doing audits or that I'm doing things that look and say, hey, did I follow the rules? And DevOps is teaching us that what we need to do is think about everything as a quality assurance activity, and CMMI is ready to respond in that context. So CMMI 2.0 is not telling us, hey, we're just doing this during some end of activity audit, but we're doing this as part and parcel of everything that we do so that we do create a feedback loop from every activity and saying how is this activity influencing what's going on and how are we learning from it, how are we pushing that back earlier, pushing it back to the left so that we can understand. And last but not least, the CMMI practice area of verification and validation, again, a unification at long last of two CMMI 1.3 process areas, one of verification and validation. Practice 1.2 tells us to perform validation to ensure that the solution will function as intended in its target environment and record and communicate results. That question in the DevOps environment becomes a question that we are asking continuously. It's a question that we ask back while we're developing user stories, as we're writing code, as we are doing demonstrations in our Agile environment, as we are moving forward into everything that ultimately delivers value to the customer. So it becomes not something that we do at the end of the day, but something that we do continuously throughout everything that we do. DevOps is encouraging us to do that. CMMI 2.0 is giving us the machinery and asking the questions that help us to get there, help us to think about those particular challenges that we might face. So then the DevOps Third Way. The third way is about experimenting and learning, and it's that continuous mindset that CMMI has long been encouraging us to think towards. The third way of DevOps is maybe the most famous example for those of you who are subscribers to or aware of the success story of Netflix. Netflix brings to us the idea of the simian army. If you haven't heard of it, it's a rather cool idea, which is that Netflix is constantly trying to break their own systems. They are deliberately injecting faults into the live stream to see how they respond to it and to make their own systems rugged, to make them robust against bad things that might happen. And the idea is that you do that when you are well prepared, when all of your IT staff are at hand and where everyone is ready to react, so that you can learn from the experience, and so that then when things go poorly, when it might be the middle of the night for a majority of your support staff, you've already practiced the scenario and you're ready to move forward. So you're training as you operate, you're operating as you're training. So let's talk about that sort of idea of continuous learning, continuous improvement, innovation, and experimentation in the context of the CMMI 2.0 practice area, causal analysis and resolution. So in the old days, say 18 months ago, in our modern world, 18 months is long ago, CAR was a creature of CMMI high maturity. But the idea of causal analysis and resolution has always been integrated throughout CMMI, just as it's integrated into the DevOps Third Way. So recognizing this and taking advantage of it is one of the implications that was a factor in distinguishing high maturity organizations in CMMI appraisals that I performed from organizations that were not doing high maturity. So one of the things that separated lower maturity from higher maturity is recognizing that CAR is not merely an aspect of high maturity, but an aspect that you need to be integrating throughout your continuous improvement journey. And DevOps bakes that very much into the third way. You are not doing DevOps unless you're thinking about what can I learn from every situation and how does that push me towards improving what I'm doing and being proactive in that. So in CMMI 2.0, CAR itself and CAR ideas are more explicitly integrated throughout CMMI. And the same is true of the DevOps Third Way. Experimentation, learning, asking questions about why something happened and how we can learn from an incident for, in the case of the simian army, going as far as deliberately stressing our system when we're in a good position to respond and learn, is how we go about learning and improving. So a key source of that information is from your tool chain. So much of your support for how you're doing business, that is essentially your processes, your business, or the enabling part of your business, is delivered through your tool chain. So consequently, there's information that's useful from a CAR perspective and the third way, continuous learning perspective from your tool chain. So you might ask yourself as you're going forward, and you might look to the CMMI 2.0 CAR practice area for guidance. How am I going to capture that data? How am I going to learn from that data? How am I going to integrate the data that I'm getting out of my tool chain, recognizing that the data exists, to look for improvement across my entire endeavor? And so CAR helps us to think about the mechanisms for doing that. So that brings us to DevSEC Ops, which is one of the reasons that we're here today. So in our turbulent world, delivering, integrating, and maintaining secure systems is critical for avoiding failure. Just like we would regard someone who is foolish enough to leave their car parked in a public area and fail to lock it, we recognize that not making security an integral part of our systems and software behavior is equally foolish. And rapidly, organizations who have security failures that lose information are regarded not so much as folks that we should feel sorry for. We may feel sorry for ourselves if we were one of their customers, but folks who didn't adequately understand and integrate and guard the precious information and precious systems that they have at their disposal. So unfortunately, there's no true police officers out there in the information technology world to guard our information technology. We become our own police officers. We're responsible for guarding our own technology. And, of course, information technology extends beyond our explicit computer systems, as we recognize, into our cell phones. That's obvious, but also into our automobiles, into our televisions, into our home thermostats, you name it. IT is there or coming there soon. So to provide you a little bit of ripped out of the headlines context for this, there was an interesting New York Times opinion article on September 10th from the General Counsel of the American National Security Agency, where the article said, hey, if we are not already there, then we're soon to be living in a world where information technology-based attacks exists not as a one-off event, but as a soup that we all live in, that we all swim in, that they're going to exist at all times and at all levels for everyone. So it's not going to be simply about, hey, banks get attacked, insurance companies get attacked, governments get attacked, hospitals get attacked, but about everyone being attacked and potentially being under attack at all the time. And so if your security integration isn't part of who you are and what you're doing, then the only reason you haven't suffered a loss yet is because you haven't been gotten to yet, and it will be coming to you soon. So security that's being added at the end of systems development acts just like what we're treating it as an afterthought, and is ineffective as an afterthought. So DevOps, in particular DevSEC Ops, provides a different viewpoint. Now, there's a lot of controversy. People hate the acronym DevSEC Ops. That's, oh, what ugly language. But the concept is important even if you don't care for the language. And it's about integrating in and breathing and living security, not as something that's separate, but as something that you do all the time. So you might ask yourself, where does security testing happen in your continuous development and continuous integration pipeline today? How are you doing it today? So there's two important ideas that you should get from your response. One, if you answer that anything other than during user story development or doing requirements or doing code implementation, if you're thinking about security testing at some place other than integrating it through every phase of your life cycle, then you're already too late. You're doing it as an afterthought, and ultimately you will fail when someone who is a little bit smarter, a little bit faster, a little bit more up on what the attacks might be comes around to you. Also, I kind of cooked the books with the question there, because if you didn't reject my use of the word of testing in favor of asking about how security is designed in, made part of the requirements, etc., then you're thinking about things in a dangerous way. It's not about testing. It's about doing it throughout the life cycle. So DevSEC Ops and CMMI are guiding us to change our culture to move that security thinking from the left, moving it from the right, rather, to the left, to think about it as integral and as part of everything we do. So this gives us an opportunity to reinvent how we're doing security, to make security part of our coding practices, part of our code. And so DevSEC Ops means about embedding security into our development. And the chasm that exists between security professionals and DevOps professionals and code developers and the Agile implementer needs to go away. It needs to make security not an independent, frequently non-IT specialist topic. That chasm has to end, and it has to be integral into what we're doing. So we have to end those turf wars. And it's about measurement. So baked into the CMMI, as many know, baked into DevOps and baked into DevSEC Ops is how do we have data that tells us how well we're doing. So to ask yourself questions about, if I do have a security glitch, how long does it take me to patch? How long does it take me to discover? How long does it take me to resolve? And so I might say, hey, in doing DevSEC Ops, I need to turn to the machinery of CMMI 2.0 to ask questions not just about how am I doing software development or systems development, but how do I extend and ask questions about my security environment in my software environment and my software environment in the way I do security to say, how do I do at discovery and patching and everything else. So a nutshell in a few minutes of some fairly large and integral and complicated topics to give you kind of that setting for what needs to go on. All right, Ron, back over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Bob. I appreciate that 30,000-foot view, and I love the way you dived into the shallow end with the PAs and practices in a very common sense manner. There's a great context between CMMI and DevOps. So for those of you not familiar with CMMI version 2.0, this slide is really just giving you kind of the overview. As Bob said, the days of the chasms and stovepiping is gone. That's one of the lessons we learned with CMMI previous versions. So the graphic you see here shows that the approach that we took with 2.0 was really looking at this from an integrated point of view, not just the model and its list of best practices that enables organizations to build and benchmark key capabilities, but also to provide an adoption guidance approach to support it with good systems and tools to provide the training and certification that goes along with it, and an integrated appraisal method to ensure consistency and high fidelity across multiple types of organizations. We've had about 60-plus version 2.0 appraisals conducted in 2019. They were starting to be accepted in January of this year. And what we're seeing is that these goals that you see, the best practices being continually updated, strengthening methodologies, values, and so forth, like Agile with Scrum. But if I could give you one three-word takeaway, what CMMI 2.0 is all about, it's sort of the takeoff of the real estate logo. Instead of location, 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 it's all about performance, performance, performance. What we're looking here and what we've built into 2.0, Bob alluded to the value statements for every single practice and every single practice area in the model. And those are just to make sure, like, it really boils down to the what's in it for me from a process role, so that every aspect of the organization, everyone who is fulfilling the overall, whether it's development of a product or whether it's delivery of a service or whether it's a managing supplier, 2.0 gives you that continuous and holistic framework to be able to look at that. And then we've added a couple of key areas around organizational and project governance, two practice areas, governance that Bob alluded to, and implementation infrastructure, that ensures that there's habit and persistence moving forward in how you execute. So what we've seen with Agile, DevOps, and others is it often becomes sort of just another silver bullet. What the CMMI allows you to do is actually set up the whole arsenal for tackling problems and gives you a game plan, a battle plan for attacking things. So rather than a silver bullet, it gives you every weapon you need to go after the problems you have from a business perspective. So let's talk a little bit about contrasting DevOps and CMMI version 2.0. The link that you see down at the bottom here, How to Explain DevOps in Plain English, I thought was a pretty good article, but I had some disagreements with the priorities of the schemes here. So for example, if you look on the upper left here, a CMMI perspective is going to be focused on performance and outcomes at the very first beginning of the adoption of 2.0 throughout the entire, I'll say, process implementation or process adoption life cycle. DevOps in that article, treating basically teams like NASCAR racing crews, they're not looking at each aspect of the race. They're looking at the finish line saying, how do I go from the finish line and back up through the race to make sure that by the time I get to the finish line, I'm actually going to be the first one there. So that's one of the things that 2.0 and DevOps has very much in common, is that key focus on performance and outcomes. But Bob talked about people, process, automation, the movements and the cultural aspects that empowers developers, that breaks down those silos. CMMI has been doing that from the very beginning, but what we have with version 2.0 is a much better framework that ties in with these methodologies. The architecture is very open. We have organizations using 2.0 with various standards like ISO, with NIST standards, et cetera. So one of the things you'll see there is a clear, I'll say, handoff between how work and performance is being done at the execution level, but also how you can scale it across an organization. So it's not just at a project development team, it could be across the entire division, enterprise. It's really, the scale is up to you as an organization and as practitioners on how far you want to take this. The last item from the article talked about a collaborative approach to building and delivering software. Again, the project and organizational scalability that we have in 2.0 is clearly been there, and what we're seeing in these initial appraisals in 2019 is people are seeing the benefits of that from both the project perspective and the organizational perspective. Now, a little bit of a teaser going forward is we're very excited that our next set of content that we'll be pushing out in the model, we've pushed out the initial dev model last year in 2017. We followed it up with services and supplier management the end of last year. Our next round of content will be security and safety. There's an entire new capability area coming out called Managing Security and Safety. It has ties and connections throughout the core parts of the model, things like planning, configuration management, quality assurance, and governance. But it also has very specific practice areas. There are 3 practice areas on managing security, managing safety, and managing threats and vulnerabilities. Those are the 3 new PAs that will be coming out. In addition, a lot of the information around different standards, we have a question, for example, around will we be addressing all requirements of ISO 27001? And my thanks and shout out to the security working group that we had helping us with 2.0. That team did do mappings and reviews of all the existing standards, not just 27001, but NIST 800, 171, multiple other standards that are actually referenced and or linked to, and you have the ability to tie those in with any 2.0 implementation or adoption that you care to use. So it's one of the things that we're seeing working out fairly well with the approach which we have in 2.0. So before we jump into our Q&A, Bob and I would like to just do a little bit of a back and forth here. So you've heard a little bit of background about DevOps. You've heard some about 2.0. We've talked about Agile. So let's talk about them together now. Bob, in your experience, when you're talking to customers and so forth on DevOps, what are some of the common misinterpretations that you're hearing when people say, oh, we're doing DevOps?
So I think one of the most common ones, Ron, is that people are looking at the idea of the tool chain equals DevOps and DevOps equals the tool chain. They frequently interpret it as it's about the automation, and although it certainly is about the automation helps us to understand what's going on, helps us to move value without a human being having to be as much in the loop. They don't recognize necessarily it's about that cultural change, and I think that's one of the things that CMMI and DevOps, if you read beyond just the front cover, emphasize very heavily, which is the idea it's about how you're thinking about things, not just about how you're adding tools to things. So question back for you. A few minutes ago you spoke about the evolution of CMMI as we go from development and services and starting to think about security and everything else. Clearly, the CMMI has been around for a long time. Clearly, the CMMI is time-tested in terms of the value that it delivers. As people start to think about how do I automate my processes, how do I bring together all the pieces, not just of my tools, but my people and everything else about my culture, how do you see CMMI continuing to integrate that going forward?
That's a great question, Bob. And one of the things that we've been discussing is, for many of you, you might be familiar, one of our most downloaded resources in the past was our Agile Playbook. So Jeff Dalton, former PAB chair, many of you probably know Jeff. He's a big Agile, I'll call him, and I think he'll be proud of this, a zealot for Agile and CMMI version 2.0. And one of the things that we did was to basically create a kind of call it an Agile Playbook for CMMI. We're working on revamping that playbook, and we want to set up a series of playbooks or guidebooks, if you would, something very brief, something very easy to use. Jeff actually suggested at one point we do a pop-up book. I don't know if we'll go that far. But we do want to have something that's very practical, giving people back to that adoption and transition guidance that's part of the model suite now. We want to be able to give people handbooks, playbooks, what have you, the content that they need to actually help adopt this in a successful way. For those of you who have been around CMMI for a while know that a lot of what happened with it was driven by, I'll call it the maturity level chase that was pushed by the DoD and adopted by a lot of commercial organizations. And that didn't actually end in the results that we were hoping for with CMMI. It became kind of a box-checking activity, which is similar to what's been happening with ISO, and I can say that because I'm an ISO lead auditor. What we're doing with 2.0 is really trying to make it very practical from an implementation adoption guide, but we're also creating, as Bob pointed out, that constant feedback loop with webinars like this, but we've got a lot of different other channels for people to give us feedback. A long-term vision of what we want to do with the model is to create sort of a crowdsourced, a vetted crowdsourced approach or app where people can actually submit best practices. It can be vetted by a series of subject matter experts and thought leaders, and then basically posted out there to sort of raise all ships from an industry. That's what we're seeing happening in the MDAP world. So as you see, what's really exciting with our Medical Device Discovery Appraisal Program, or MDAP, is the FDA has taken that and provided an environment for us to use 2.0 for its direct intentions, and we're seeing really key benefits there on medical device manufacturing. So I think it's one of the things, in answer to your question then, Bob, is we're going to be keeping 2.0. The beauty about what we've done with it is it will flex for the next 50 to 100 years in terms of being able to accommodate new techniques, new methods, all these kinds of things, but still provide a solid framework and grounding for how people go about either doing product development, service delivery and management, or managing supply chains. All right. We are at the 11:45 hour. We have several questions coming through here. So I'm going to throw the first question, Bob, if you don't mind. There's a couple in here specific to version 2.0 that I can answer, but let's talk about this question about what's been your experience specifically around DevOps, Agile, and CMMI. Where do you see the key, I'll say, fulcrums or leverage points to bring the cultural change needed in an organization to achieve some of these things we've heard about today?
So my experience has been that to the degree that we start, and I think this reflects your experience as well, Ron, and correct me if I'm wrong, my experience has been that when we start to talk about specific tools, when we start to talk about CMMI as a cultural phenomenon, or DevOps as a cultural phenomenon, or Agile as a cultural phenomenon, then we have fallen into the buzzword mirror world, and that we're really not speaking the language that leads us to success in an organization, because the organization, unless it's exclusively an IT organization, doesn't care about what we IT people are doing. What they care about is the value that we're producing. And so I think of Agile, and I think of DevOps, and I think of CMMI as tools in my toolkit that provide me with the right thought processes to be able to influence the organization to say, how are we delivering value, how are we moving that delivery so that we are thinking about it earlier in our development process, and how are we rolling that out. If that happens to be by using a particular tool when that tool is appropriate, good for us. But if we get into the culture wars between, hey, I'm Agile and you're not, hey, I'm CMMI and you're not, hey, I'm DevOps and you're not, then we have inherently created a silo culture. We have inherently excluded people, and we are on the path to not achieving what we hope to achieve with any of them.
Great, Bob. Thank you for that. So let's go to our final poll. Christina, can you walk us through the final poll here, please?
Yes, and once again, you should be able to see that poll in the center of your screen. If not, just try refreshing your browser. So we're asking, what are the biggest risks you see in adopting a DevSEC Ops CMMI-based approach? Is it cost to implement or adopt? Impact on current development pipeline and capability? For example, product release delays, cost overruns, quality, etc. Is it quality of products and services? Security and similar concerns? Or too complex for my organization? Again, you just need to select the radio button that best corresponds to your answer in that panel, and then just click the Submit button. And again, we'll just give it a few seconds to allow everyone to vote. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and there are the results.
All right. Thank you all again for responding to this. We had about a 32% response rate on that one. So looks like our Pareto here is the top two items, the impact on the current development pipeline and capabilities and the cost to implement. The good news is that, yes, I know I'm saying this because I'm chief architect, but I have seen this live and working. So has Bob. CMMI version 2.0 actually gives you the ability to address both of these things, actually all 5 of these things simultaneously. It really depends on what your pain points are and needs are. I would assume, like, for example, in this last question, too complex for my organization, maybe you think that DevSEC Ops and CMMI don't work in small organizations. We are seeing quite the opposite in the results from appraisals and so forth. For example, most of our appraisals happen on organizations less than 100 people. A large majority of those are in the 50 FTEs and less organizations doing very nimble, agile work, et cetera. And we've seen 80% of all appraisals from the last several years actually have organizations getting appraised who are using agile methodologies as part of their activities. So we're gonna go to a couple more questions that we've got here. So a couple questions that I can answer very quickly around what we're planning with 2.0. Are we looking at SAFe, Agile, and how to integrate DevSEC Ops with SAFe? The answer to that is yes. We are thinking about a SAFe and CMMI playbook. It might become part of the overall playbook on how that works, but we've been definitely looking at SAFe. We are also working on some aspects of this great question from Peter Allen about going to be done with embedded systems in high-risk industries like medicine or space. Ironically, the answer to that is we have 2 definite examples of that with the medical device discovery program with medical devices. Embedded software, embedded systems there is actually having a real benefit and impact. And part of what we're doing with our security and safety release that's coming out, and that's another question, we're planning on trying to get that out in the early part of 2020. We're going through the final content reviews on that in some focus groups. But we are also working closely with NASA, the entire organization of NASA, the entire agency. They were a key sponsor of what we formerly called CMMI Next Gen, which is now CMMI version 2.0. NASA is interested in creating a software assurance playbook or view of the model that takes about 15 of the practice areas in play, including what we're planning for security and safety, which NASA has helped us to create. And it will be basically, those will be directly applicable to activities in those types of verticals and industries. So we're excited about seeing that happening and continuing with both the FDA and MDIC program around medical devices, but also around NASA's got a really tiny budget on software. For those of you who don't know, they're listed in the top 100 code bases or organizations in the world, meaning they're in the top 100 having the largest code base of any organization in the world. Their annual budget for the mission critical and safety critical software that they've been working on with us is $2 billion annually. So keep that in mind as we're working forward, that we're definitely trying to address those activities as well. Bob, let me go over to you for a very practical question here. For people interested in getting more information about DevOps certifications, DevOps training, and so forth, can you just give us a quick overview on that?
Sure. So the most famous organization right now that, much like the CMMI Institute, that is doing DevOps certifications, training, whatnot, is the DevOps Institute. There is several courses, DevOps Foundation, DevSEC Ops courses. So just a little plug. Business Transformation Institute, which is my company, teaches those. There are other partners out there that teach those, so you can bring up your skills. A lot of online reading you can follow, of course. You can look at the examples of Netflix, but the fundamental place is what one of those training and certification courses last a couple of days. Gives you the fundamental knowledge, much like the CMMI introduction courses give you the fundamental knowledge and language that you need to be able to do this. Ron, I also wanted to elaborate on the question that you were just answering a moment ago about mission-critical, life-critical systems, NASA, medical devices. The DevSEC Ops world, we need to be thinking about every organization, every mission, every application as life-critical, as safety-critical. Suppose you are building a health insurance provision system, or you are building something that helps control power settings, power plant management, ... Every one of these has IT in them. Every one of them is subject to attack. Every one of them has to think about security. If I were an attacker and I found a way into a health IT system, not the IT system, not the health system itself, the health insurance system, where I cut off everyone's benefits or changed somebody's benefits in some sort of strange way, what would happen? How many people would ultimately die? Not immediately, but because they couldn't get access to their proper benefits, and that caused consternation and issues. Suppose I cut off the electricity to every nursing home in Florida, what would happen? So DevSec Ops and the security thinking and thinking about every system as a life-critical system is something that we have to think about. And one of the reasons we have to move security and security thinking and this IT thinking forward in our systems thinking and not leaving it as an afterthought. Okay, so I hijacked it a little bit there. Back to you, Ron.
Perfect, Bob. Thank you for that. So I've got a couple more questions here. We're looking at a cost to implement question. There's a couple questions around cost to implement and the best way to move from 1.3 to 2.0. We do have a transition guide. I mentioned that. That is actually a free artifact that you can go from the CMMI Institute website, cmmiinstitute.com. You'll find it there. If you just do a search for Adoption Transition Guide. It's a very simple 6-step process to help you move from 1.3 to 2.0. And we will be adding additional playbooks and similar kinds of artifacts to that particular part of the product suite as we go forward. Questions are around when will these playbooks be available. Several of them we're planning to have as part of the release with security and safety that I mentioned that will happen right now. The plan is, as I said, in early 2020. So we'll continue to be working that together. We've got a question here about providing examples on measures to be captured. I would point you to the model itself. We've got a lot of information in the model about key examples of measures and so forth. So those of you who are not aware, CMMI 2.0 is now available in an online experience. We call it the model viewer. It gives you the ability to kind of hop around the model much more rapidly than a book. It's got the entire model content there with the ability to sort of filter on what you think is important to you. So a lot of these examples that Bob and I were talking about today can all be found from the model viewer. There is a license fee associated with the model viewer. It's nominal for the year. And essentially what the license does is it allows you to get new content that we're continually pushing out. Right now our cycle with 2.0 is targeting about a semi-annual release of new information and new content. We will try to continue to, I'll say, take a page from DevOps and see what we can do to accelerate that and drive some of that forward. So thank you all for that. We have about 3 minutes left. We've got some great questions here today. Bob, a quick one back to you. How is DevOps different from Agile and SDLC? Do you want to hit a couple of the key points?
Sure. So Agile is principally looking at my understanding and responsiveness to the customer's changing needs. DevSec Ops and DevOps expand that viewpoint to say development is important, development is a key driver of what we're doing, but it is also about the entire delivery chain. If I produce code and I deliver code and I cannot sustain that code, I cannot react to problems with that code by introducing patches. If I don't understand the needs of the people who are actually supporting that code in the field, then I'm not thinking holistically enough. Agile is a powerful tool for helping to create value in reaction and in response and with great agility, obviously, to the customer. DevSEC Ops expands that viewpoint and says, how do I understand the value proposition across my IT enterprise to serve the business needs?
Great. Thanks, Bob. Several of you have some specific questions on where to get some of this information. One of the things we will do after the webinar, in addition to sending out a notice to you with the recording, and Anna's going to talk about that in just a minute, we'll also, what we did the last time is we'll take all these questions, any that we didn't have time to get answered today, we will go through and actually create a little FAQ that goes with these with some at least initial answers. I've got two others that I'd just like to hit very quickly. Are you, CMMI Institute, involved with the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification? The answer is yes. We've been working with the DoD for a while now and talking to them about the certification, the model, the appraisal approach, et cetera. So yes, we're definitely staying, and we will stay involved with them as we move forward. And then, great question on how will DevSEC Ops, CMMI fit into new age projects like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotic process automation. We actually already have some language in 2.0 around those topics, but we're going to continue to look at opportunities. We may actually add new content around PAs on that particular thing. So that's we've been working a lot with a lot of other partnerships on some of these organizations around the world doing similar kinds of things so we can actually bring a more holistic solution. So we're at the top of the hour. Anna, I'm going to turn it back over to you for final housekeeping.
Thank you so much, Ron, and thank you, Ron and Bob, for this excellent information. And thank you, Christina, for all your help with the polling and with everything else. We're so glad you could all join us today. Just a reminder, as Ron had just mentioned, that we will be sending an email out to all the attendees following this webinar, and you'll likely get it next week so that we have time to compile all of the questions and answers, because we want to be thorough with our responses. And also included in that email will be a copy of the recording of this webinar, as well as the slides that we went through today. So we want to make sure that everyone has everything that they need. And as Ron had mentioned, a lot of people were asking, where do I find the Agile Playbook, and questions about where to find version 2.0 resources, the adoption guide, things of that nature. So I will actually include links on the follow-up information that you receive via email so that you have quick access to all of those things. And if there are any other questions that come through, as you can see on the screen, please send anything to info@cmmiinstitute.com, and we'll make sure that we answer you quickly on any questions that you may have on the information that we covered today, or just any information in general. So thank you all very much again for joining us, and hope you have a great day.